record this. All right, let me repeat that. First, let's do this formally. This is HCA520, week 4, Thursday, August 26th. And of course, discussion for module 2 and task for module 2 is due today. And the question I put it out to the group this evening is there any one system that warranted extra special care or that takes priority over the others, in your opinion? And kindly give your rationale as well. What was clinical more important? HR more important? Which particular division did you feel that took precedent? Not precedence. What's the word I'm looking for? Took a priority. Mr. McDaniels, Ms. Montford, anything?
I just logged on, Dr. Garais. I didn't hear you.
Let me repeat that. Is there any one system from your paper, and I haven't read them yet, and I haven't graded them or anything, that took priority, that was more important than the others, in your opinion? Or was it just Mercy Hospital should be shut down? There was an argument for that this morning. That even though case study, it might be too daunting to undertake. Anybody? Clinical, HR, financial or finance, and lab info systems. Is there any one that would take priority in the Mercy Hospital setting? No, no one thought finance? Well, to share with you guys, the overall consensus of the second half of the group this morning was they believed clinical, but they believed clinical because they were looking at it as, you know how we were talking about in week 1, how everything relates to the ethos or to your mission statement. And of course, a mission statement of a hospital, no matter what the hospital is to service your patients. And I was creating an argument of, hey, how about finance? Because without proper, I'm kind of biased because I also teach the healthcare finance course, and my background, not only my background, but my education is in finance. That this is a business just like anything else. But there was argument to be made about clinical information. And we were also talking about how electronic medical records, when you really look at it, yes, it's the information, and then labs would fall apart. Your clinical management would fall apart as well. But do either of you have taken a medical billing course or recall the billing cycle?
I have not taken a billing course.
Oh, so cool. I can spout a little bit about how facilities and how finance and EMR work. So let me show you this, because this is like the secret sauce that most billers know already. And the billing cycle is essentially this never-ending pattern. Here's my favorite one. It's a never-ending pattern that, in order to, and some textbooks even call it a facility's life cycle. So, and it encompasses a lot of the things that are in those 4 categories. So, for example, you always have to pre-register your patients. Means you have to get the proper demographics, you have to get their proper insurance. And this is the one thing that, most clinical people don't understand, that you have to establish financial responsibility. So if the medical insurance doesn't kick in, who specifically is going to pay? Because you go to a hospital, everything you do in there pays. And of course, you check in the patient, you check out the patient. Of course, the patient goes through the service, And then as they go through the service, there's billing compliance and there's coding compliance. And then all of that gets sent out and has to get sent out in a timely manner. And nowadays with proper electronic medical records, it should go up pretty fast. During my time in the 90s, it was done by hand and done by phone. So you can only imagine how daunting that used to be. And then there's adjudication, meaning to say is, does the third party or does the insurance company actually accept the payment? And then, of course, generates the patient statements, which is your explanation of benefits, and then any follow-up payments, and of course, the biggie, collections. Now, I also shared with the group this morning that when I was teaching the finance course back in 2015, 2016, there was a horrific statistic by the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services that in the state of New York, most bills are behind and collections are behind a good 80 to 90 days after date of service. So have either of you ever got a bill from the hospital like there was like months ago and you're wondering like, why is it only coming now? Well, if it's coming so late, right? That means there's something wrong with this cycle. And this cycle, as you could see, requires electronic medical records. It requires, of course, check in, check out, the clinical people. It also requires finance and collections and people maintaining, the information of your balance and patient payment responsibility and all of that. And that's all the stuff that happens in every facility, but behind the scenes. Patient never sees it. And actually, you guys already know, the majority of personnel in a hospital is not the clinical staff. And the clinical staff, to be honest, is seen as more like contractors in the same way that, someone who paints the hallway in the hospital is seen as a contractor. They're there to do a specific service. And if not, we find somebody else. It's not, the clinical team isn't as vital as some people think they are. That was a rude awakening for myself as well when I was in residency and I was part of the clinical team. That's why it stated clinical information systems and not the actual clinical team. So that was some of the things that we talked about this morning. Another thing, well, one of the students, she probably was trying to hedge her bets. She didn't want to say which one was more important than the other. But her comment this morning was about how integration and communication are vital to all of these, and that if there is no proper link in between all of these departments, things tend to fall apart. Are you guys, any of you guys familiar with the term silos when it comes to communication?
Yes.
Yeah. Have you heard that before? Mr. McDaniels, well, where have you heard that before? And if you could explain your take on what is a silo.
So from my experience, silos, communications will either go top down or down up or bottom up. And somewhere in the silo, in that young lady's case, and in conversations that I've heard, somewhere in there, there's a break. Somewhere in there, things get translated from the origin to the final delivery phase or stage. And somewhere in, somewhere in there, it's like she said, it's that communication piece that people aren't communicating either clearly or effectively enough, or both.
Or not speaking the same language.
Right.
So when you look at my screen, an addenda to that, if you look at what a silo looks like, here's a classic example. If you look at this picture, or even like, how about this? Or what's a nice picture? Here's one. Because there's 4 groups. Now, what Mr. McDaniels is talking about communication, and yes, there could be communication up and down, but if you look at the silo, do you see how high it is? And how, if I'm in here, do I hear or even see what the other departments are doing? And when I have to communicate, I got to go up here, then over here, then down here. And then if I got to communicate with that person, I got to go up here, all the way over here, and down here. So there's two aspects of it, and Mr. McDaniels touched on one of the aspects of it is, of course, they're not speaking the same language. Because financial people, remember I was telling you guys the story that I had a manager, financial manager, tell me that my staff was using too many needles. She asked me, Dr. Garais, is there any way to decrease the number of syringes you use? And I was looking at her like, are you insane? Now, when you look at it from her perspective, she's looking at it in a purely financial aspect. And hence, that's why healthcare administration came about in the last couple of decades, because you have to be able to speak the same language. And another thing about silos is they're isolated, aren't they? Like I'm everybody in my silo speaks clinical, but we don't speak the other language, and we don't see what the finance people or the HR people or the lab people are doing. And that was another thing regarding integration. And then this is a lovely picture because you could see how whatever, and it's related to the lesson that we're going to be doing today, because whatever language that each of the departments speak, there has to be some sort of regular connection. And we're going to talk about that momentarily. So when you hear like silos, think of they're not speaking the same language and they're all on their own. And you will also see, and you may have seen that as well. Haven't you seen like in your current professions, or maybe you're in a healthcare facility where it's like kind of us versus them? Even with patients, it's like, oh, that's them and we're us. And that's a very, very negative thing that happens regularly. And it's because the departments don't really talk to each other. And just on a side note, with all its imperfections, the one thing that Stratford University does on a regular basis is have the departments at least once or twice a week talk to each other, so that they can explain themselves and their protocols to each other. And this is my 6th university. I've been at other universities where academics will never meet finance. I've been on universities where myself and finance are at each other's throats because neither side understands what we're doing and our goals. And again, everything has to relate because all of us have, at the end of the day, all of us should be looking at the compliance and the alliance towards the overall mission statement. So that's what they were talking about this morning. Now let's look at what is due for next week. Now, let's look at this lesson. Now, we're not going to do the graphics and systems migration path design. You guys aren't going to be IT engineers. But the one thing we're going to have to look at here is this communication plan. And that's what's due for next week. So write out a communication plan. And again, you could sit and start from scratch or find one that's already in play with another facility that's actually in the real world. And instead of this IT implementation, since we were talking about difficulties and difficulties in integration of communication between different departments, make the plan towards not IT implementation, but towards integration of the departments. How are you going to get the other departments to regularly communicate with themselves, roll out a communication plan, and you could also conduct it like a workflow, and you can make it look like this. Like a kind of like a flow chart. Yeah, kind of like this. Like we'll meet once a week, then we're going to do that, and then this. And if that's resolved, we go to here. If that isn't resolved, we go to here. Now, Those of you who had a similar systems course like this know that every time there's an arrow or every time in a process, there's a link. Number one, that's source for waste, potentially, because the more steps you have, the more potential for waste. It's also a potential for expenditure, and it's also definitely a potential for time, because again, we're in a business like many other businesses where time is money, and also for us, time is also patients' lives as well. So when you're looking at it, look at the efficiency of communication. Do you have too many arrows? Right? It goes, how simple is it? How simple is it? And then the second part, or how complex is it? The second part is research what scope creep is and how cost overrun. And I gave you a little hint about it when I showed you this workflow, right? How cost overrun. So both of these things, of course, define it, and also how both of these can be prevented through your plan. So does anyone have any questions on what to do for next week? So we're good?
Lesson and task, right?
Yes. Just this activity 3, but I'm modifying it because I don't want to go read papers about IT. Me and IT don't mix, which is odd because I've been a computer guy and a PC guy since I was 12.
Right.
So I want you guys also to fully understand how, because since the discussion this morning delved into communication, and it walked right into this thing right here, and you could see how communication or lack of communication and silos and non-compliance in certain departments and certain teams can start developing scope creep and start developing cost overrun. And talk. And another thing that they want you to also define is who are the stakeholders, who are the specific people, who are the go-to people that will be part of your plan. So when you make your plan, don't just say, I'm going to meet with finance on this and this date and talk about this and this thing. I want to speak to this person, that person, and the other person, or I want to directly speak to the CFO on this and this time and this date. You can make it that specific, but I'm okay with we'll meet bi-monthly and that kind of thing. All right, so I had to explain this a couple of times because the morning group or the afternoon group was like, not quite sure. So I'm putting the question out again. Any questions regarding on what to do for next week?
Just the task and the discussions, right? Not the lesson.
Well, this lesson, module 2, this thing.
Okay, tracking.
Do next week. And I believe the task and didn't you guys do the task and discussion already for module 2? Am I losing track already?
Let's do today. The task and discussion is due
The task and
today.
discussion is due today, but this lesson is due next week. Lesson
Yes.
for module 2, and then next week we'll discuss module 3. So it kind of gives you every other week break, you know. That's the way I'm trying to like spread everything out. So we good? And of course, you can always call, text, email me if when you're doing your research you run into a stumbling block. So going. So we're good?
I'm good,
Yes, sir.
Dr. Garais.
Okay,
sir.
with that said, if no questions, and I'll try to get to the grading, but it's graduation this weekend. And also at the same time, we're moving the Falls Church campus. So I'm going to try to get to it by Saturday. Or maybe I'll do the grades while I'm at graduation. You know how boring graduations are. And I sit
Dr.
there.
Garais, I have a question that's not related to the assignment. Did the Falls Church campus close?
It closed temporarily due to a
Okay.
whole bunch of things going on. I'm not privy
Got it.
to how everything went down. But just know that there hasn't been like like an official decision yet. So I'm
Okay.
actually waiting for that as well, to see what's going on, and hopefully, there's a lot of movement in every university now because of COVID. So we'll see what's
Got
going
it. Okay.
on. Alrighty. So I bid you a good evening, lady and gentlemen, and don't let the electronic door hit you on the way out. Have a good evening.
All right, sir.